Well, let's get the government's reaction to those scenes overnight. Matthew Pennycook, the Minister of State for Housing, is with me. Very good morning to you, Minister. We heard from the Home Secretary, from the Chancellor and the Prime Minister yesterday in terms of the initial stabbing events. The latest, obviously, is the violent disorder that SJ was just talking about overnight. What is your reaction to that?
Well, as we heard, we've 22 officers now injured. I've seen reports of vehicles belonging to members of the public set on fire, bricks, fireworks thrown at a mosque. I think it's absolutely appalling, if I'm honest. The community in Southport is reeling from the horrific events 2 days ago. From what I can see, they're trying to come together to support each other, to care for the families of the loved ones who've been killed, and to have that space for them to process the trauma, to grieve, overshadowed by this violence and disorder, I think is completely despicable. And the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister have made clear that those responsible will feel the full force of the law, and rightly so.
What do you think triggers it? And I guess more specifically, why do you think the Prime Minister was heckled as he was yesterday? I mean, you've only been in power for a few weeks.
I can't speak to the reasons why he was heckled. I think from what I saw of the footage and what I heard of the response, he was warmly welcomed. And I think it was absolutely right that he go to Southport to pay his respects. As to why the disorder is taking place, I think there's a number of reasons. One of the things that troubles me most is people coming in from outside Merseyside who aren't local to try and stir up public disorder, that trouble. And I think it's really worrying. It's not what the community, I don't think, would want. A peaceful vigil was taking place yesterday to honour those who were killed. That's been overshadowed, that's been interrupted. Really, the community needs that space to grieve, to process what's happened. And the police, who should be focusing on the criminal investigation that needs to take place into the incident, need to not be at the end of violence and abuse, but focus on that important investigation.
Let's move on to house building. Of course, your remit and something your government has been very keen to focus on very, very quickly after the election. What is the precise target that we should measure you against after 5 years? Is 1.5 million homes finished by then?
We said we'd start 1.5 million new homes over the course of the Parliament over that 5 years. That's the target which you should measure us on. We didn't specifically set an annual target because the inheritance that we've picked up is so appalling. Housing supply is projected to drop below 200,000 homes a year. On the affordable side, we're seeing grant-funded housing reduced now to between 110,000 and 130,000, down from its 180,000 initial projections. So we're in a real downturn. The government made it worse by damaging changes to the National Planning Policy Framework enacted in December 2023, including abolishing mandatory housing targets. So those are the things that we've reversed yesterday in our first steps to fix the planning system and to get house building boosted once again.
And to be clear, green belts can and will be built on if local authorities don't meet their targets.
Well, what we said, if local authorities can't meet their targets through previously developed brownfield land in the first instance or in cooperation with neighbouring boroughs, they should look to then release low-quality grey belt land within the green belt. And lots of the package yesterday was focused on the targeted release of that grey belt land. But in certain circumstances, certain local authorities may, if they can't through brownfield or in cooperation with neighbours or through grey belt release, need to release some elements of the green belt. That happens already, just to be really clear. We've not inherited a situation where the previous government didn't release any green belt land at all. They were releasing it in quantity, but in a haphazard, unplanned way, and often in a way that didn't meet local housing needs. So what we're saying is there's a smarter way to release the right bits of the green belt, grey belt, low-quality land primarily, and to ensure through our golden rules that when it is released, we get development that meets local housing needs. So high rates of affordable housing, good infrastructure and amenities, good access to open green space.
But you can force local authorities to release it if they're not meeting their targets.
They will have to release it, both through the plan-making side of things, if you like. Got to put local plans in place across the country. We've only got a third of up-to-date local plans. That is just not acceptable in a local plan-led planning system. So what local councils will face is when they're putting their plans in place, a sequential test for releasing land, brownfield first, then grey belt, then in extremis green belt land. But if they don't have those local plans in place or they're not performing adequately against their housing targets, grey belt land could be released through that route.
Which is a really big step, and I just wonder whether the 1.5 million home targets is too low. If you're putting this as such a big priority so early in your Parliament, you're taking steps like that. If 1 million homes were built in the last Parliament, can and should Labour build more than 1.5 million over 5 years?
Well, you're right that we said we'd act quickly and decisively to start to tackle the housing crisis, to unlock economic growth. That's what we've done through the changes yesterday, which are the first steps to fix our planning system. We think the 1.5 million target is the right one. Just to be very clear, it is an incredibly stretching target, and that is partly because of the inheritance that we've picked up. As I said, housing supply now projected to dip below 200,000 homes a year. So we've got to get ourselves in these early years out of this real trough we're in and step up house building rates across the Parliament. So we think the 1.5 is the right target. It's stretching, it's ambitious, but we think with the measures we put in place yesterday and more to come, we can achieve it.
I wanted to end with your view, the government view on the situation in the Middle East. Clearly tensions are very high and escalating overnight with a number of high-profile killings of a Hezbollah leader yesterday and a Hamas leader overnight. We discussed earlier with Alex Crawford about a bit of a vacuum of leadership from the US as we await to see who will be president from next year. What can the UK realistically do to prevent things bubbling over? And will the Prime Minister himself be travelling to the region anytime soon?
I don't know, in response to the last question, whether the Prime Minister has plans to. I know our Foreign Office ministers are engaged in a concerted effort to do what the UK can to reduce tensions in the region. You're right that they are at very high level. We've advised British nationals in Lebanon to leave now on commercial flights and for British nationals not to travel to the region. It's extremely tense. All the effort has to be on de-escalating the situation and getting both parties, the Israelis and the Lebanese, to engage with that US-led process on the diplomatic front to reduce tensions.
Matthew Pennycook, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Good to see you.